Welcome back, guys, to the Journey to National Master. Today I bring you a game that I played for Torneio Fechado Marquês. It's a tournament that I've been covering from time to time. And so this round I got paired up against Jorge Barrento, 1662 rated player. And I had the white pieces, he had the black pieces. And let's see how the game started. Let's go. So I started with e4. I was playing a lot of Joe Bava London before in the last tournament in San Sebastian, but I decided to go back to e4, best by test. So here my opponent played d5, and I was expecting this sort of moves here. I saw while preparing for my opponent that he likes to play some weird stuff like d5, also knight f6, the Alekhine. So I was kind of prepared for those two options. And okay, d5 takes and knight f6, one of my favorite openings against e4, this Scandinavian with knight f6. And here I played knight f3, which is a very tricky move. The normal move that people just make very naturally is d4 here. And the thing with d4 is that it allows this bishop g4, which it's kind of tricky. This is called the Portuguese gambit, variation of the Scandinavian. And I knew that my opponent loved this position, something like bishop e2, for example, takes, and here, I mean, this is just the bread and butter of this variation. Just like my opponent is gonna play knight c6, castle long, put a lot of pressure on d4, put a lot of pressure on the king side, and yeah, this is not what I wanted at all. I just didn't want to give him a game that he was familiar with. Here there's also c4, but the thing is that after c6, like, the best option that white has here is probably d4. And after this, we transpose into a Panov attack from the Caro-Kann. So very nice. You can get this from the Caro-Kann. Let me just show you pretty quickly. E4, c6, d4, d5, takes, c4, knight f6. It's the exact same position. So yeah, just wanted to point that out. Just a nice little detail. But okay, after knight f6, I decided to throw in a very tricky move that's not really popular, which is knight f3. And this kind of stops his plans. If he goes for bishop g4 here, it's not the same thing. And he went for bishop g4, but here I have bishop b5 check, which is a very annoying move. And it's annoying because it kind of disrupts the coordination of black's pieces. He has to block the check somehow. If he brings back the bishop, I can just play bishop c4 and I keep my extra pawn. I'm doing very well. I can also just take on d7 and let's say queen takes, for example. Here c4. Now I can really take keep holding to this pawn here. For example, I can just take and I guess d4. But yeah, this is not my type of thing to allow all this pressure. But I could do that for sure. Also, if he blocks with the knight, for example, on d7 here, I can just play h3, bishop h5, and just c4, or I can play knight c3, which is probably even better. And this pawn is still mine, so it's not easy for him to put pressure. The thing is that he, with this check here, it kind of puts something in between the queen and the d5 pawn, which is very important. Here he played c6, which is a good move, and I took with the pawn. And here I was expecting knight c6. Just feels like the most natural move, just developing the knight after you just sacrificed the pawn. But here my opponent played b takes on c6, which I thought it was horrible, honestly. Like, it didn't really make any sense to do this, because after bishop e2, now he doesn't have the c6 square for his knight, so yeah, it doesn't really make sense. Like, he just gets an isolated pawn for no reason. I don't know, maybe my opponent was afraid. I think he was, like, he didn't like that after knight c6 I can go for this, but this is a better version of what happened in the game, because now I don't have my light square bishop, and this pin can be a little bit annoying. So yeah, but okay, my opponent took with the pawn. I went back to e2. I really love my position. I feel like I'm way better. I have a huge advantage. Here my opponent played e6. I played h3, asking that bishop a question, also giving some luft for my king in the future. Just a nice prophylactic move. Here my opponent played bishop h5, logical, castles, and bishop d6. Here I just decided to put some pawns in the center. It was about time. d4. And here my opponent played queen c7, which I was very happy to see. I was kind of afraid at first of some ideas with bishop c7 here, to try to get in queen d6 and put a lot of pressure here, threatening mate. Let's say I just do I'm just gonna explain the threat. Let's say I play c4, he plays queen d6 here, and I just do a random move like knight c3, for example. Here I would be already losing, because after bishop takes on f3, I can't take back because he's threatening queen h2 checkmate. So yeah, that is the threat. So I was afraid of that, but in all honesty, I could even play c4 here, and after queen d6 I can just play knight bd2, and I'm doing good, because now this idea of taking the knight doesn't really work the same way, because I can just recapture with the knight. And if my opponent tries to reverse the move orders with something like you know, let's say c4, bishop takes on f3, for example, bishop takes on f3 and queen d6, here I just have g3 and I'm doing fine. There's no problems at all. But okay, it didn't happen in the game. After d4 he played queen c7, and I just played c4, so all good. I just want to, you know, take as much space as I could in the center and put my pieces behind the pawns. So okay, very logical. Here he castled, and I play knight c3. Here it doesn't really make sense to go to d2, because there's no threat of him taking. So knight c3 is just a better developing move. The knight is more active on c3. Here he played bishop f4, which I felt it was kind of weird. I thought that you would want to keep the dark square bishops, because his pawns are kind of on light squares. But okay, you just you know, offered the bishop trade, so I took. And here, you know, I was a little bit lazy. You know, I was up a pawn. I started seeing ghosts. You know, I could make probably a simple developing move like, I don't know, rook e1. I think probably would be fine. But you know, I was kind of annoyed at some rook d8s, and maybe in the future some bishop takes on f3, and then the pawn on d4 would be hanging, something like that along those lines. So I decided to play a very lazy but still nice move, queen c1. The good thing of having like a really nice position is that you can sometimes just afford to make some lazy moves and trade pieces. So yeah, okay, I'm up material, so I shouldn't be that worried about trading pieces. Here, if my opponent declines the trade, I can just play rook d1, keep developing, and I feel like I'm doing amazing. So yeah, here my opponent just took on c1, which I also felt amazing, because I just take with my a1 rook, I develop it, and after rook d8, just rook d1, and just simple chess, effective chess. And yeah, I was just up a clear pawn, so pretty much you know, doing very well. Here my opponent played knight bd7, and I started thinking for a long time, because okay, my position is good, I'm up a pawn, but how do I move forward? Something that was annoying me a lot was this bishop here, putting pressure along this diagonal, and I wanted to somehow disturb this bishop. And yeah, the thing with this position is that it's not really easy to play d5, and even if it was, I don't know if I would want to play d5, because this pawn is weak. I don't really want him to just liquidate a weakness, and these pawns are kind of strong. And yeah, I thought about something like b4, maybe a3, start preparing b4, but those ideas, you know, I'm always like not sure when is the right time to start expanding on with the pawns. It's literally something that I still don't understand. It's an area that I have to work on, because yeah, I'm kind of afraid of moving pawns in general, because they can't move backwards, something pretty irrational like that. But okay, here I calculated a really good variation, which I didn't end up playing, but I'm gonna show you guys what I was calculating. I was trying to find something direct, something concrete, and I was calculating g4, bishop g6, and now a very nice move, knight e5. And this move is very nice because I'm threatening to take the bishop on g6, but I'm also attacking the pawn on c6. And the thing is that my opponent has to do something about that. If he just protects the pawn on c6, I would just gladly take this bishop, and I feel like here I would be doing very well. I think this bishop will have potential to be a really big monster on f3 and putting pressure along this diagonal. But the most natural move for black is probably to take the knight, and after pawn takes, it's good that it doesn't have the d5 square. So, you know, I saw two options here. It doesn't make sense to take the rook on d1, because it would just give me the d file for no reason, so EU is not gonna take my rook. And here there's two options for black. There's knight e4, which was the first one that I calculated. I was gonna take on e4 with the knight, and after bishop takes here on e4, I was just gonna play f4, and I felt like this position was very nice. I'm just gonna bring my king in, and I should have just a pleasant advantage here. But the variation that made me not want to go for this was knight d7 here, attacking the pawn on e5, kind of forcing me to play f4, which I really want to play anyway. But here knight c5, I didn't really like this. And yeah, it's pretty much the same variation that we just saw, but yeah, with the knights on the board. And I thought that this knight could be annoying, and I really didn't want to go into this position with the knight still on the board, which, yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. Yeah, really thinking about it more deeply, I don't think that it makes much difference, and the position should still be good. But you know, I started saying that maybe I shouldn't do this is too committal, maybe I should play a little bit more slow. I just pushed a lot of pawns in front of my king, which in this scenario doesn't really matter, because there's no threats, there's no queen on the board. I'm not gonna get checkmated, I'm just getting space. But yeah, I just decided to not go for this. I didn't really evaluate this as clearly better for me. I felt like it was kind of unclear. I still played g4, but I went for knight h4. And my idea was that, okay, I just want to take the bishop and that's it. I don't want to allow any knight trade, 0 on e5 and all that mess. I decided, okay, let me just play knight h4. I still want to take the bishop, and there's no real good way for him to avoid that, or so I thought. Here I calculated just the simple bishop e4, and here, you know, I felt okay, I probably don't want to take. This is something that I probably don't want. And I saw, okay, after bishop e4 I just have f3, and after bishop g6 I just take. That was my idea, takes, and I would be fine here. But my opponent actually surprised me with a move that I didn't really see, and it's such a simple move but makes a lot of sense. My opponent played knight f8, and it's a very nice response to my knight h4. The idea here is that you know, if I capture the bishop on g6, it just recaptures with the knight, and probably is doing very well because the knight will have access to the f4 square, which is very weak now that I pushed the pawn. So yeah, it doesn't really make sense to take the bishop now. And yeah, it's kind of unfortunate because now you see why knight e5 was so much stronger. In that position with knight e5, he couldn't play knight f8 because I was eating c6. And yeah, here the engine says that the best move is knight f3, which I would never play. It's so hard to just play the knight back, because this is just admitting the mistake, admitting that the knight h4 move was just horrible and didn't really make much sense. But you know, it's really hard to just admit the mistake, and when you know that you are like with some advantage, you don't want to waste time, and going back with the knight kind of feels like wasting time. So I didn't go back with the knight. Instead I played bishop f3, just a simple move attacking the c6 pawn. My opponent defended the pawn on c6, and here I still didn't know what to do. I was very confused. I didn't really know how to progress and to improve my position. And so I played king g2. It's kind of a waiting move. I was just waiting to see what his idea was. Mostly, of course, I wanted him to move the knight so I could take the bishop. But here my opponent finds a very, very good move, incredible move. And yeah, it's a very nice practical move, which is h5. Boom. And yeah, this is just a very nice move because it not only puts pressure on my pawns, my extended pawns here, but also threatens to keep the bishop forever with bishop h7. And here, you know, I was just like, what is going on? Like, I was already regretting this whole idea with knight h4, bishop f3, king g2. I was like, what am I doing? I'm a complete idiot. Like, this doesn't make sense. I'm just allowing counterplay for no reason. This, like, I was just really pissed. And yeah, I just couldn't really figure out the position. Here the computer is funny, it just says b4 and just ignore everything that's going on the king side, which, okay, I'm not gonna do that. So here, I mean, if my idea with knight h4 was to take the bishop, so be it. I'm just gonna take the bishop. And yeah, unfortunately here there's no tactics, and I saw this before capturing the bishop. At first sight, if you don't calculate, it might seem that you can win a pawn with g5, with the idea that after knight h7 you take on h5, but this would just be losing, and you have to be aware of these tactics and you have to look out for them. Here knight f4 check forks the king and the bishop, so you can't take the pawn. And if you go something like knight h7 and h4 here, doesn't really work, bro. The h4 pawn is hanging, so this whole g5 idea doesn't work. Here the computer wants king g3, which I kind of saw, but I didn't really like that after h4 check something like king g2 just gives him just knight f4 check, and he's just like trolling me. And if I can't go to g2, I have to go to h2, and this position is just looks miserable because my king is super passive here. This pawn is actually very strong because it won't be easy for me to put pressure on this pawn, and yeah, I just didn't like my position here. So I decided to go for something more simple, which is bad, honestly, which was to take the pawn on h5. And this just allows complete equality. Believe it or not, I just lost all my opening advantage. And here my opponent just plays knight f4 check. I moved up, he took the pawn on h5, we check, and I just took the knight. Knight takes on h5, a king f3. And yeah, here I was already like, damn, I just completely messed up, but okay, I'm still up a pawn, if anything. My opponent played rook c7, and I completely panicked. I was like, I just screwed up all my opening advantage, like what am I doing? Yeah, here I just saw that the idea of my opponent was just doubling on the d file and putting a lot of pressure on d4. This d4 pawn is weak because it can't really be protected by a pawn. And yeah, I started panicking. I really didn't know what to do. And yeah, I thought that if I defended the position with something like rook d2, rook d1, that this pawn would fall. But it's not true. Something like rook d2 would be fine after rook d7, rook d1, knight f6. Like, it's not easy for him to win this pawn. It's also not really easy for me to, you know, improve my position. And here it's not easy for him to win the pawn because he can't really push e5 just yet, or c5, because in that scenario I always have d5, for example. Let's say I do a move like a3. If he goes for c5 here, I think I probably have d5, and the same goes if he plays e5 here. I probably also have d5. So yeah, he wouldn't be able to win the pawn on d4 that easily, if ever. But I completely panicked, as I said, and I played d5. And in my calculation, for some reason, I thought that after all these trades on the d file, I thought that I would end up with a pawn on d5, which is just simple mathematics, bro. Like, just completely blundered. And I only realized that I blundered after these trades. And it was funny because it took a long time to take on d5, because it looks like such an impossible move, such a bad move, that my opponent was probably like kind of surprised of like, why do you go for this? Something along those lines. And here the obvious point is that that you need to calculate is that this pawn is not hanging. Even though it looks hanging, it's not hanging, because, for example, if you take the pawn on d5 here, you just get it with rook takes c1, and here after rook takes on c1, rook takes on d5, my opponent is just up a piece. Unfortunately, this intermediate move with the knight e7 check doesn't work, because my opponent here just attacks the knight with king f8, and yeah, after something like rook takes on d8, for example, just king takes on e7. So yeah, that wouldn't work as well. Of course, if even worse is that if I take here with a rook, that would just hang a rook. So yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have any tactic in my favor. And here, you know, I quickly played rook d4 because I was bluffing, you know. I completely blundered, but I wanted to make it seem like I did it on purpose, you know, that I sacrificed the pawn on purpose. And it's funny because, like, people do that a lot in chess. Like, people just bluff. Of course, you don't want to be like, oh my god, I just blundered. That would give confidence to your opponent, so you kind of want to bluff. I was just like, yeah, rook d4, I mean, all planned, right? Just gave up a pawn because of blah blah blah. Just so dumb. So okay, rook d4. Of course, I was very mad at myself. Now I'm laughing, but I was very mad at myself because what is going on? How did I just lose all my advantage? Like, this is complete equality. But okay, rook d4, knight f6, rook d1, rook d7, and yeah, this pawn is not gonna fall anytime soon. There's just enough protection always, and yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Here, you know, I didn't really have much ideas besides pushing pawns on the queen side, you know, trying to make a passed pawn. So let's just go b4. Here my opponent plays g6 to try to improve his king. Makes sense. Here I just keep pushing, a4, king g7, a5. And yeah, we were starting to get low on the clock. And yeah, this was not an easy position to play for both of us, I think. But yeah, here we probably had like, maybe I would say 30 minutes on the clock, something like that. Here my opponent played rook h8, which kind of looks like a blunder at first, but it's a nice move. Here, of course, the threat is to take on h3 with check, but it looks like I have time to take on d5 here, because after rook takes on h3 here, I would have king g2, and I'm attacking the rook. Knight takes on d5, he doesn't have to take on h3. And I saw that here he has a very strong move, which is rook d8, which is very funny. He just, you know, played rook h8 to play rook d8 back. And here the problem is that my knight is hanging, and I don't have a good way to solve this problem. The main point is that if I take the knight on f6, he takes on d4, and you know, this is just losing for me, this endgame, like just losing. And yeah, there's no way for me to retreat the knight and to protect the d4 rook. So very nice trick by my opponent, but here I just played king g2 and I thought, okay, I'm fine, like I just defended this pawn. Here my opponent surprised me again with rook h5, and I felt like this was very weird. But yeah, I guess my opponent just wanted to activate his rook and complicate the game. Okay, I played rook d3. Makes a lot of sense to kind of, you know, protect the knight and also maybe swing the rook to protect, to block from checks. Here my opponent checked me on g5 and I played rook g3. I wasn't that worried if he traded the rooks, it would just improve my pawn structure, so I was fine with that. Here my opponent played rook f5 instead, and yeah, at first I was like, what is this move? But it makes sense, honestly, keeping the rooks on the board, putting pressure on f2, maybe in the future some knight h5, attacking the rook on g3, and also intending to play knight f4 check, something like that. Yeah, it was tricky. Also, knight e4 might be lurking in the future in case of this knight moving away. So it's a pretty complicated position still, especially now that we were getting lower and lower on the clock. b5 here, just keep going with the pawn push. That was my main plan, just trying to create a passed pawn on the queen side. That would be the only way for me to fight for an advantage. Here my opponent played rook c7, which I didn't really understand at first, but okay, he wants to activate his rook. Thankfully for me, I don't have to move my knight because the rook is defending laterally, and here I just push b6. My opponent takes on b6, I take back, and he plays rook b7, and here, you know, I got what I wanted, but it's still not easy. Be careful. So here I played what looks like a very suspicious move, but it's kind of the only way, which knight a4, which feels like the knight is really misplaced, but okay, he's protecting the pawn, and it's not really easy for him, thankfully, to attack this knight because there's no rook a7 to put pressure on it. And this rook here on f5, you know, ends up being a little bit misplaced because it can't really use this this back rank to put pressure on me. So okay, knight a4 here, and my opponent played knight e4, and yeah, this is a tricky move because my opponent is attacking the rook on g3 and also threatening to take on f2. So I just played the only move, rook f3, dodging those bullets. Here my opponent traded, which I was very happy to see. I was expecting rook g5 check, and after king f1 the game would continue, but yeah, very complicated still. But here my opponent traded, I took with the king, and my opponent played knight f6. And here I would say that we probably had like, I would want to say like 15 minutes on the clock, maybe a little bit less, like 12 minutes. We were definitely getting lower on the clock, something like 15 to 10 minutes, something around those lines. So the pressure was stacking up. Here I just played king e3, very automatic, just improving my king, bringing it closer to the action on the queen side and in the center. Here my opponent played knight e7, and here I had a big thing because I immediately saw that I had a draw. What I immediately saw was rook takes on d5 just leads to a draw immediately, because after knight takes on b6, knight takes on b6, rook takes on b6, this is just a 2 versus 2. And yeah, there's no chances someone would win this. Even though my pawns are slightly weaker, I would easily be able to defend this for sure. But you know, I saw that I had a draw, and okay, I still had like around 8 minutes probably in the clock, so I was trying to look for better, because I mean, in worst case scenario, if I calculate and I don't see anything clearly better for me or winning, I will just stick with rook takes on d5. But in calculation, I saw that I was probably close to winning, and that my opponent was in trouble. And what I calculated was rook b4, king f6, king d4, attacking the pawn on d5. If my opponent plays king e6, I have this very nice move, knight c5 check. He takes the knight, I take with the king, and now I'm threatening to go and play king c6, and if my opponent plays king d7, I can just take the pawn on d5, and that endgame would be winning. So I'm gonna put it on the board. What I calculated was rook b4, king f6, king d4, king e6, knight c5, boom boom, and here I'm threatening king c6, attacking this rook, so king d7, and after king d5, this would just be winning. This endgame would just be easily winning, because the time that he wastes trying to capture this pawn, I'm gonna gobble up these pawns, and yeah, there's no way he defends this, like no way. But okay, and I saw that and I was like, okay man, I'm just gonna go for it. Maybe I'm missing something, but I have to risk it. Like, I will not just settle for a draw. And I played rook b4, king f6, king d4, and here my opponent saw that king e6 wasn't really a good option, so he played knight b8, which of course I didn't calculate. And yeah, I was getting excited here, but I was still being careful. First that looks like wins is knight c5, but my opponent is threatening a fork on c6, so I need to be careful. Here I just took the pawn. I thought that it was just simple, and it kind of is. I was expecting something like knight a6 from my opponent, and now here I didn't really know what to do, but that didn't happen in the game. I took, and he gave me a check, which I was like, what? I didn't see this check as well. I was just pretty much playing on instinct here. We were both probably below 5 minutes or something like that here, I want to say, or at most like 6 minutes. And here I just decided to go back to, you know, avoid any checks. Of course, a trick that I saw is that I can't really play king c5 here because of knight e6 check and forking my rook. So okay, I just moved back. My opponent played rook e7 check, which I thought, okay, this is too much. Like, what are you checking me for again? I was like, okay, this has to be a mistake. King f3, no more checks. What are you doing now? And here my opponent played knight a6, and you know, my blitz instinct just kicked out, and I blitzed b7. I just saw the whole variation pretty much almost immediately. And yeah, this is amazing move that I have, because, you know, I'm saying like, take my rook, oh no, my rook, but then I'm promoting to a queen. Here my opponent doesn't really have time to to take on b7 because I'm defending, and yeah, this is just game over. Unless he has some resource to defend here. Opponent immediately blundered with rook e8 check, which I immediately saw rook b6 check. And yeah, here the only defense for my opponent, or the best defense I want to say, would be to go back to b8 with the knight. But yeah, this is very, very uncomfortable, and I'm pretty sure I would be able to improve my position and end up winning this one, but it would be tougher for sure. But here, you know, rook e8 trying to stop the pawn just loses immediately to rook b6 check, which, yeah, it's a very important detail. The point is that, of course, I'm threatening to take the knight, and after rook e6 I take the knight regardless, because after rook takes I just promote to a queen, and this happened in the game. And here, I was 100% sure I would win. I just needed to be careful, because these endgames can be a little bit tricky sometimes. But yeah, I just gave some checks, and after king f8, just a nice move with the king g3, and here my opponent just immediately stomped into a tactic with king g8, and now I just win the game immediately because I'm forking the king and the rook. And here my pawn resigned, and I was very happy with this win. I completely messed up the opening advantage that I got, but I managed to complicate the game and keep pushing for a win in a completely drawn position. So yeah, I was happy the way I managed to win. But yeah, very nice, very nice. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will be catching you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.